This is Chapter 2, Academic Reading and Learning. This chapter includes tips that will discuss what you should do when you're reading academic tips. Also covered in this chapter are some of the things you should focus on, some of the things that should help with reading and taking notes from academic textbooks. Now, the quote for this chapter is, "The books that help you the most are those which make you think the most," by Theodore Parker. What does this quotation at the top of the page have to say about the connection between reading, thinking, and learning? There is a connection between the three. The next thing you should think about and write down are what books make you think the most. So what types of genres make you think the most? What types of books, if we're not discussing genres, what types of textbooks make you think the most? So take about 5 minutes and think about that. Now, the learning outcomes within this chapter, there are 7 of them. The first one is reading to learn. The second one is understanding the reading process. So what are the 4 steps involved within the reading process? Make sure you remember that. Make sure you write it down. The third learning outcome is using basic reading strategies. The fourth is reading critically. What does reading critically mean? There are 2 elements present when you're reading critically. So what does reading critically mean? And then the fifth one is improving vocabulary. 6 is reading graphics, and 7 is review of reading and learning. Now, learning outcome 1. When you're approaching your reading, you want to make sure that you're effective in your reading for academic. You want to make sure that you are effective in your reading for academic reading. So you want to make sure that you divide your assignments into doable parts. So you want to make sure that you try to read for 15 to 30 minutes at a time. Again, keyword doable parts. Now you want to ask yourself, why would I want to split my reading up into doable parts? Why is it essential to divide your reading up into doable parts rather than just going straight through the reading process? Make sure you have an answer to this question. The next thing, you want to make sure that you have a quiet place to go read or to go write. You need space to read and write without distractions. So a question that's important here is, why is it crucial and why should your space be quiet? Think about campus. What are some places that would be ideal to read and write quietly? What would be some places that wouldn't work? Now, this is important that you have somewhere that's quiet to read and write without any distractions, because you want to make sure that you rid your mind of all distractions. So if there's a lot of traffic, there are a lot of things that you can stop and look at and all of that, that's probably not an ideal place to read and write. So again, why is it critical to have a quiet place to read and write? Have that answer. The next thing, you want to make sure that you gather all materials. So you want to make sure that you have your notebooks, any related handouts. Make sure you have internet access, of course. If you're in a math class or anything that requires calculations, make sure that you have a calculator. Now you want to ask yourself, why is it important to have everything with you when you're going to go study? That's important, and you want to make sure that you have an answer to that question. The next thing, you want to approach your reading as a process. Again, there is a process to reading. You want to make sure you approach it as such. Your academic reading requires that you do a number of things in a certain order. These things are on page 13 and they span to page 16. So you want to make sure that you understand the reason for why you approach your academic reading as a process rather than just going straight through it. So imagine if you are assigned 100 pages of reading. Would it be wise to go through a process or just speed right through it with no process? It's probably a little wiser to approach it as a process in order to retain the information and for proper summarization, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The next thing, you want to make sure that you use proven reading strategies. Using proven reading strategies such as taking notes and annotating text gets you actively involved within your reading. So what does it mean to be actively involved? Now think of the word actively involved. So that means that you are actively doing something. Active action. Something is occurring. So it's not enough to just read. Although reading is an action, it's not enough to just read. You have to be actually doing something. For example, if someone says read page 6, what does that look like in terms of active involvement? What would you be doing if you were actively engaged while you were reading page 6? So make sure you think about that, and that will help you to answer the question of what does it mean to be actively involved in your reading. The next thing, know what it is to look for when you read. There are key ideas or elements that you need to identify in order to understand a text, and this is on page 22 to 23. So what kinds of things visually jump out at you to let you know that something is important while you're reading? What does it look like? So you want to take notes of these things for further discussion in class. An example of this would be when something is bolded. Usually when you say something that's bolded, that lets you know that something is important. So you want to make sure that you take note of that. If something's bolded, it's probably important. What are some other ways that you know visually that something is important while you're reading? The next thing, summarize what it is that you've learned. So note any key concepts or explanations that you do not understand. And this is on page 21. So the next thing you might think about is why is it important to note what it is that you've learned, as well as on the other hand, note what it is that you have not learned. So again, why is it important to know what it is that you have learned? And then why is it important to note what it is that you have not learned? It's important to know these two things, whether you think so or not. It's definitely important. 8, review your reading from time to time. This will help you internalize the information so that you can apply it to your writing as well as your classwork. So, what does internalize mean? You'll need to know what the word internalize means. So, define the word internalize and be prepared to discuss it. Now, the reading process, as previously stated, there is a reading process, and I did say make sure that you know the steps of the reading process. There are 4 steps of the reading process. The first step is pre-reading. The second is reading, rereading, and then reflecting. So pre-reading, that's basically where you become familiar with the text and establish a starting point for the reading. So whether that's any background information that's given to you in the very beginning, if it is information about the author, that's all pre-reading. Or even just looking at the title, that's considered pre-reading because it is familiarizing you with the text before you actually read it. The next thing is going into reading. That's self-explanatory, to read the text. Then you go to rereading. Now, for what reason would you need to reread anything? It's important to reread to gain clarity. If you didn't understand something, if you weren't really focused while you were reading something, you would want to reread it. The next thing is reflecting, and reflecting is one of the most important steps. Now, in order to understand this process, it's necessary to understand what the word reflecting means. So when you're reflecting, you evaluate your reading experience. So the way that you do this is by asking some key questions. So the first question might be, what have you learned? Again, what you have learned. Why is that important? So one question is, what have you learned? Another question, what questions do you have about this material? So what questions do I have? That's going to help me understand where I should focus. The third one is, how has this reading changed or expanded what you know about the topic? Sometimes when you read something, you come in with a preconceived idea or a preconceived notion, but then once you read something, it expands what it is that you already know, or it familiarizes you with it, period. So you do know something if you knew nothing at all. So how has this reading expanded what you know about the topic? These are all questions that you would ask within the reflecting process, because it is an important process, the most important process probably within the reading process. Now the question you want to ask yourself is, why is this step critical in the reading process? Well, to answer that, it lets you know how well you understand what it is that you've just read. So if you ask yourself those questions, for example, if you say, what have I learned? And by the end of the reading, your answer is still nothing or I don't know, then you didn't really learn anything. That's why reflection is important, because it lets you know what it is that you have learned or what it is that you understand from what it is that you've just read. So this is going to be the reading process visually. Again, in chapter 1, we talked about people who visualize and it helps learn, and a lot of people are like this. So this will show that. So you have pre-reading here. So that's the very first part. You're pre-reading. This will be the purple. Then from pre-reading, you go to reading. Then from that, you go to rereading. And then following that part, you go to reflecting. Now, you get to the reflecting part. Now, why does it go backwards in orange? Because if you get to the reflecting part, for example, how has this changed what I already know, or what have I learned? If you get to this part and you still don't have the answers, you need to go backwards. You need to go from reflecting to reading. And then if you get to reading and you still don't understand what's going on, you probably need to pre-read. Maybe there's information within that, whether it's background information or author information to let you know this person's role, why they're writing the way they are, why they're using the voice that they're using. Pre-reading may answer some of those questions. So this is just the reading process going forwards and backwards. All right, you also have more reading processes that will help you. So you have KWL. The K stands for what I know. The W stands for what I want to know. And then the L is for what I've learned. Now, these are important because, again, what it is that you know, you need to know what it is that you know, so that way you don't waste your time trying to relearn it some more. So let's just say you have 3 days to study something and you have 3 pieces of information. If I know that I've mastered piece number 1, I don't need to waste as much time on piece number 1 because I already know it. So I can just focus my time on piece number 2 and piece number 3 because I already know that I'm familiar with number 1. The next thing, what it is that I want to know. This is important because when you have a test, think of it as this. You have a test and you want a study guide. Well, the study guide tells you what it is that I want you to know. So again, what it is that I want to know. So think of it the same way as what it is that you want to know. And then what you've learned. Again, you want to ask yourself what it is that you've learned. And this is important because if you look at something and you say, what have I learned? And your answer is nothing, then you probably need to go back and, let's just say reading process, go back through the reading process and figure out what it is that you've learned. Or if we're talking about anything else, if you don't have the answer to something or you can't readily answer something, you didn't learn it. So you know that you need to go back and either relearn it or get to a point of where you master it. All right, learning outcome 3, using basic reading strategies. So the next thing you have is annotating a text. Annotating means that you add comments or you make notes within the text. So some ways that you do this are, or some things that you do while you're annotating is write questions within the margin. This is really important because the reason, or you want to ask yourself first of all before that, or I want to ask you, why should you want to write questions why would you want to write questions in the margin? So if you're just taking notes, think about that. You have regular notebook paper and you're just taking notes. So why would you want to write your questions in the margin, or in the margin as opposed to in the body of the text? So I'm going to show you guys an example of this, and this is it's an Avid template, but you can still, the process is still the same if you're thinking about notebook paper. So this is an Avid template, and again, think of it as regular notebook paper as well. So within the middle part, so that would be this. That's going to be where you would write your notes. So if you were writing notes, you just have this and this, and you different things that will help you remember. So I usually will like to do outline form because that helps me stay organized, and it also helps me to understand what's going on when I go back and look at it, because I mean that's the point. Why take notes if you're not going to look at it again? My A, my B. So there's my information. So why would you not want to take notes within this? Let me zoom into this a bit. So why would you not want to write questions here? As you can see here, maybe you can't. Let me zoom into that a little bit. But if you look on this side, it's got questions. So that's where you would put your questions. So where it says essential question, that's probably the biggest thing. So let's look at chapter 2, which is titled Academic Reading and Learning. So you want to ask yourself an essential question before you even start any of this stuff. So you know the chapter is titled Academic Reading and Learning. What's a good essential question? So probably a good essential question would be, what is the connection between academic reading and learning? Or what is the best way to read academic text, whatever the question may be. So on this side, you would write questions. So if I had question number 1, this is my question, and then I had question number 2, and that was my question. You put it in the margin as opposed to in the actual text, because this will help you to be able to find it. So again, on the left-hand side, there are your questions, and then in the middle, there's your text. And as you can see on the bottom, you have the word summary. So what this basically means is you can summarize all of this information that's within here, and then the essential question, if you did get that answered, you can answer the essential question down here as well. So that kind of helps you with the reflecting process part of it. All right, so again, the reason that you want to have your questions in the margin is so that they're easier to find. So think about if you had a question and you wanted to ask someone what the question was. You don't want to go through and start digging to try and find the question. If you already know that by default it's going to be in the left-hand margin, all you have to do is go to the left-hand margin, find the question, and you can ask whoever it is you need to, or you can do some more research to find an answer for that question, or whatever you need to do. But it's conveniently in the left-hand side, so that way you already know this is where my questions go, and there's no digging for it. Another question to consider is, if I have a question, who can I ask? So when you think about this, you're in an institution of higher education. So you think about this. Who can you ask? Am I the only person you can ask? No, there are other people you can ask. So who are some other people that you can ask if you have a question? Think about that and be prepared to discuss it. Another thing is that you want to make sure that you underline or highlight the important parts. That's essential because, again, you want to make sure that it stands out for you. So if it's something that's important, you want to underline it or highlight it so that way it stands out for you. Another thing, you want to summarize key passages. So if the example that I just showed you, it has summarizing on the bottom. You want to make sure you summarize key passages. Now, what's the purpose of summarizing your key passages? What part of the reading process is encompassed in summarizing key passages? That's going to be reflecting. When you summarize something, that's where you're going to strip it down to the main points, and then it's going to help you understand. It's going to help you gauge whether you understood something or not. So that's going to be the same as the reflecting part. Next thing is, why is it important to define new terms? Because, again, you do need to define new terms. So now, why is this important? Why not just skip the word and say, well, I don't know what it means, and just keep going? Why is it important to define new words? The next thing is making connections to other parts. So if you have other parts within a sentence, they should help you fill in the gaps. So if you kind of don't understand, let's just say you have 3 paragraphs. And so you understood paragraph number 1 and you understand paragraph number 3, but you're kind of fuzzy on paragraph number 2. If you understand number 1 and number 3, that should help you because you can make connections between the two to be able to help you better understand paragraph number 2. So you want to make sure that you are able to make connections between all the parts to help you understand the whole. A key point is that you want to make sure that you highlight or underline, that highlighting or underlining alone are not good ways to annotate. You may forget later what it is that you marked, why you marked it. Was it just that you marked it because it was a stopping place? Did you mark it because you wanted to further explore it? Did you mark it because you thought it was important? So you want to make a note as to why you highlight something as opposed to just highlighting it and thinking that's enough. Another thing you also want to do is write notes in the margin as a reminder to you of what you were thinking while you were reading. So I'm going to show you this as well on the whiteboard within the textbook. So within this textbook, I have a part that I highlight in agreement. So within this, it says, let me zoom into that a little more. Okay, so the part that's highlighted is where it says, the same goes for subjects and verbs. If the verb does not agree with the subject and number, both being either singular or plural, these two crucial sentence parts cannot work together. So I have this highlight, but there is nothing else. So what was I thinking when I wrote this? Did I have a question about this? Did I think that there was something that didn't make sense to me? Did I think this was important? Did I highlight this because I needed to tie it into another part to draw the connection? There's nothing here that says why I highlight it. So you want to make sure that you make a note as to why you highlight something. All right, so the next thing is effective note taking. So when you're taking notes, they're going to help you to focus your reading on the material and understand it more fully. Effective notes make studying for an exam much easier. So a question that you can ask yourself, or that you should ask yourself, is how do effective notes make studying for an exam easier? So again, keyword effective notes. How do they make studying for an exam much easier? A tip is to use your own words as much as possible. Again, you'll remember what you said or what you were thinking before you remember what anyone else said or what they were thinking. So make sure you use your own words as much as possible. Record only key points and details. Consider boldface or italicized words, especially if you're typing. Make sure you bold it, make sure you italicize, just to make things stand out. If you're writing, make sure you highlight. And again, when you highlight, make a note of why you highlight. You can use graphics, captions, as well as main text. Use abbreviations and symbols to save time. Examples of that, you can use verses, you can use the pound sign, you can use the ampersand, you can use etc. You can use B/W, that's between, as opposed to writing out the word between. Now, this is especially helpful for people who, most people who cannot write as fast as other people talk. Especially, I can take myself, for example. I talk fast, and a lot of times by the time I'm done at the end of the sentence, someone is still writing and they're in the middle. So a lot of times if you cut out things or if you abbreviate, it's going to help. All right, learning outcome 4, reading critically. Reading critically involves a lot of analyzing and evaluating. Those are the two main elements in reading critically, analyzing and evaluating. Now, throughout your collegiate career, you will be analyzing and evaluating. Now, analyzing is classifying and comparing ideas as well as looking for cause-effect relationships. And then evaluating is weighing the values of a text and considering its strengths and its weaknesses. So again, analyzing is looking at cause and effect relationships, and then evaluating is weighing the value of a text and considering its strengths and its weaknesses. In every single class that you will take, you will have to either analyze, evaluate, or both. So it's essential to know that reading critically entails both analyzing and evaluating. All right, so learning outcome 5 is improving vocabulary. So a way that you can do this is, or the benefit of improving vocabulary is to help with academic readings. You need to understand words as they're used in each text. So some ways to do this is to use a vocabulary notebook. Students who English is not their first language, traditionally, this is very helpful for them because then you can keep something visual that helps you understand, okay, I saw this word before and this is what it means. But it's helpful for anyone. If you don't understand a word, keep a vocabulary notebook. So that way, one, you can practice using these words rather than saying, okay, there was this word, I don't remember, I looked it up, and I don't remember what the word was. You want to make sure that you keep a vocabulary journal, especially to help you improve your vocabulary. The next thing is to use context. So what is context? So be able to define what context is as it relates to word usage. So an example of this would be if I was to say, paint the wall ecru. Now, if you don't know what this means, if you don't know what the word ecru means, you can look at the words around it to figure out what exactly this is. So think about this and be prepared to discuss it. Another thing is understanding word parts. Another way to help you define words is to understand the word parts. So for example, if I was to say the patient should take it easy because he suffers from cardiac prehypertension. Now you can look at the word parts to help you define what understand what cardiac prehypertension means. So you can look at the word cardiac, cardio, heart, and then you can look at prehypertension. You can break that up into parts. So we'll go back to the whiteboard for this part. So, to help with word parts. So, if we were to say, so we have the patient suffers from cardiac, and then prehypertension. So if we were to say this is what someone suffers from, cardiac prehypertension. So if you say to yourself, okay, I don't know what that means, so I don't even know where I should go with this information. So you have the word cardiac, which again, as I said earlier, means heart. So we know that it's a heart condition. Now, what are the word parts? Within this, you have pre, then you also have hyper, and then you have tension. So the word pre means what? Before. Then you have the word hyper, which means over or above. So we'll say above. And then tension, pressure. So what does this patient suffer from? They suffer from a condition with the heart, which is before, above pressure. So they have pressure in their heart and it's high. So we'll use high. That word works better. Okay, so they have a condition with their heart and it's high pressure of the heart and it's in the preliminary stages or before. So that helps you figure out word parts. So if you know that someone had prehypertension, you understand that it's a heart condition. All right, and then the next thing is graphics. So learning outcome 6, reading a graphic. You want to make sure that you scan the graphic And then after that, you want to study specific parts. 3, question the graphic. And then 4, reflect on its effectiveness. Sometimes there are graphics, but they're not very effective, so you want to make sure you reflect on its effectiveness. So graphics can be useful where you have multiple pages of text with numbers and you still don't understand what the information means. So let's just say you're maybe taking an economics class and you have a bunch of information and you have no idea what any of those numbers mean because there are numbers all over the place and words all over the place and you just aren't really sure what it means. So at the end of all the reading, it may say, see graphic 1, which is a visual representation of all the information that you just read. Now, if you see graphic 1, you might say, okay, well, I don't specifically understand what they're saying, but I know that from this graphic, this number or this category is higher than the other category. So that's kind of like the example given here, where let's just say you have category 1. Within category 1, you don't have anything meaningful here, but you do know that in category 1, series 1 is higher than both series 2 and series 3. So if you saw all this in wording and you still weren't sure of what it meant, you could look at this and say, okay, well, I understand this first thing is higher than the other two. At least that's better. It helps you to supplement what it is that you just read. Now, remember that you shouldn't solely rely on a graphic. Is to supplement the information that you've already read. It's not a replacement. So you can't look at a graphic and say, okay, well, I know one thing is higher than 2 others. Okay, well, what does that mean? So it will help you to supplement. It's not going to replace. All right, so review of of chapter 2. So the first one, what are the 4 steps in the reading process? Make sure you're able to answer that. The second one, what does it mean to annotate a text? So what does it look like to annotate? So when I say look like, if you were going to actually do it, what does it look like to annotate a text? Where should your questions go? So if you are annotating and you write questions, where should you put them? Number 3, what does it mean to use context clues to figure out the meaning of a new word? So what do context clues mean and how do they help you figure out a new word? The 4th one, why is it important to know how to read graphics? What can a graphic help you with? So make sure that you are able to answer these questions as they pertain to chapter 2. This will be very helpful if you are able to do that.